How are we, people? So this is going to be a very short, sharp video on how you, as a footballer, can start to prepare your training week for pre-season, and it's going to give you an understanding on how you should be training, what you should be training across the week around team training. The mistake a lot of players make, I think, is relying solely on team training to get you fit for football. Now, whilst this is a very good period of time where you can get exposure to playing football, get the loaded legs, the high intensity distances that you need, the technical side of the game that you need to develop, like, yes, team training is great for that. But what you don't exposure to is strength, power, direct speed work. Now, it's a very, very important window of opportunity for a lot of players. I would go as far as saying the phase before it, the off-season phase, is just as, if not more important. Let's say, depending on where you're watching this from the world, let's say UK-based athletes and players. You finish in April, May, right? You finish the season in April, May. You then have a 6 to 8 week window where you have an opportunity to develop specific qualities that you might be lacking in. For example, if you're a slightly leaner player, you might want to add some mass, some size, some strength, just to develop the physical demands a bit more, especially if you're kind of playing in quite a physical league. If you've had knee pain, you might need to get your knee stronger. You might need to do some direct tendon work for that knee. If you're someone who has weak ankles, you've got glass ankles and you're constantly rolling your ankle, that's going to be a focus for you. And this is often what we do in the off-season phase, look at these problem areas for a lot of the players we work with and say, right, where do we need to improve on to bring up your overall athleticism so that you can have a really productive pre-season and in-season phase. Once we do that, you then go into pre-season. And this is also a very important window of opportunity because now we're going to start to take what we've done and intensify it. I want you to imagine the summer months, off-season, pre-season is like you, as an athlete, as a player, you are going to build a brand new house, right? And that house is going to be bigger and stronger, better than you've ever seen before. That house represents you as a player and it represents your performance. Now, for that house to stand strong, the foundations need to be very strong, they need to be deep. And this is what the summer months of training do. They lay the foundations. They set the precedence for what you're going to do just before the season starts and also in-season training, which all of you should be doing. In-season lifting, sprint work, power work. And if you're not doing it, you're just shooting yourself in the foot. If you don't get the summer months right, or if you don't maximize the summer months, the pre-season and the off-season phases, it's like building that house on sand. And when you get to a certain point in the season, you're going to collapse. The house collapses. And that's where you start getting niggles, your recovery slows down, your performance drops off, and you just feel like shit. And you might be sitting on the bench, you might be injured. It's a terrible place to be in. I've been there myself, so I get it. I've also been at the other end of the spectrum where you are just completely dominating games. And it comes from what I did. And we often see with the players we work with, it comes from what they did in the summer months leading up to the start of the season. Successful pre-season training requires a balanced approach. It's really important that I mention that. And the reason why it's important is because it comes back to the idea that training alone is enough to get you fit. Whilst it's an important part of the puzzle, the bigger picture is you need other aspects to add to that to maximize your football performance. It's more than just conditioning, because that's all that team training is. It's conditioning your body for the demands of the game, but it's not giving you the strength, the power, the speed work. You're not taking care of your nutrition there. You're not taking care of your recovery there. You're not taking care of your injury prevention or your weak areas. So we need to really focus on that. Now, a lot of the stuff you do outside of team training is going to fall into one of three categories, maybe four: strength, power, speed, and recovery. I've already said a house can't be built on sand. It's important that you keep that at the forefront of your mind, and you always remember, like, at any time of the season, like, why am I training a certain quality? What should I be training at this point? An analogy we use with a lot of players is, imagine you've got like a whole ton of buckets in front of you, right? Like buckets you would take to the beach. And each bucket represents a different element of your performance. So we've got one bucket representing strength, one bucket represents speed, another represents conditioning, another represents your technical work, your ball work, another represents your recovery and nutrition. We could go on for days. Like there's so many different buckets that contribute to your performance. Now, we need to look at any point during the season, like any phase of the season, what are we getting exposure to? What buckets are being filled up? So when during the preseason you're getting a lot of exposure to football and team training, Your conditioning bucket is definitely being filled up. Your change of direction bucket is probably being filled up because there's a lot of agility involved in preseason training. Your technical element with the ball, you're getting touches on the ball, that's getting filled up. So where do we need to then focus our energies? Well, strength is always one, because a stronger athlete has a less likelihood of injury. Power is one, because that's going to help you with the acceleration you're sprinting. And then speed one, because believe it or not, during team training, you don't actually get enough exposure to high intensity and actual top end speed for you to actually get faster. And that's why a lot of players struggle to develop speed. Yes, they might be fit, but in terms of actually getting faster, they struggle to build it. The rule of thumb, and we say it to the players all the time, inside Fit for 90, 2 to 5 days is the window where if you don't train speed within that time frame, you're actually getting slower, which is crazy and it boggles people's minds sometimes, but you need to train speed consistently and often all year round if you're really serious about getting quick and staying injury free, because sprinting is the best line of defense against injuries, in my opinion. And we see it a lot with the players we work with. The ones that sprint and the ones that sprint often tend to get a lot less niggles. They recover faster, and the injury rate is a lot lower than players who don't sprint. If you're someone who's struggling with recovery, it could be down to your strength. A lot of players think they need to get fitter when in fact they need to get stronger, because a stronger athlete will have a much less likelihood of injury, number one, but the recovery rate will be faster, which just by getting stronger means you're going to recover faster and be able to play more football through the week. That's a great place to be in. That means you need to be focusing on your compound lifts, you need to be focusing on your plyometrics, and you need to be focusing on your accessory work. The accessory work comes back to what I said at the beginning of this around what your problem areas might be. So for me as an example, tends to be my Achilles and my calves generally. I always try and keep on top of them. So that means a lot of my accessory work comes down to isometrics around the Achilles tendon. It comes down to calf raises, single leg calf raises, eccentric calf raises, focusing on keeping that area really strong. And when I do that, I get a lot less problems. And if I ever neglect that, I find myself getting issues around that area. So a lot of my accessory work in the gym towards the back end of a workout focuses on that. My compound lifts, my plyometrics are always at the start. They're like my big lifts, your trap bar deadlifts, your RDLs, your squats, your jumps, your throws. Once you have that strength foundation, the layer on top of that is power. So strength is the foundation, and your power is the ability to use it explosively, which is of course vital when you're on the football pitch. If you're a more powerful athlete, you're going to be able to accelerate better, you'll sprint better, you'll jump higher. And the way that this looks in the gym is through plyometric training, is through jumping, is through throwing, is through bounding, and is through sprinting as well. Once you've got those two layers set in the foundation, bringing this back to that house analogy, so we've built the strength, the first layer of foundation, then we've got the power, and then you go for the speed, right? So speed, the exposure to speed is very, very important. Even when you're doing team training, like something I recommend a lot of players probably should be doing is doing a little bit of speed work before team training actually starts. Work on your acceleration, work on a little bit of deceleration, maybe a little bit of change of direction. If you can't do it before team training, do it on a day where you can, maybe after a recovery day, so that you're fresh going into your speed work to maximize the gains from it, and get that exposure at least once a week, if not twice a week. A lot of the guys right now in their pre-season phase inside Fit for 90 are getting that 2 exposures to speed work per week, which is great. You have to remember that 2 to 5 day rule. If you're not training speed after 5 days, you are getting slower. So make sure you're training it. It'll help you become more explosive. And quite honestly, it's probably the most important way to stay, especially for someone who gets hamstring injuries, it's probably the most important way to stay injury free. We find a lot of the players, if we ever come to the program with a hamstring strain, once we've gone through the phases of rehabilitation and they've met the criteria, the testing is showing that they're in a good spot to return to high speed running, we really make sure that we lengthen that high speed running phase out before they go back to return to play, because it's the high speed running which is so important for strong and healthy hamstrings. And if you neglect that, or you don't get enough speed work, I can guarantee at some point you're going to get tight hamstrings, your hamstrings will start to niggle a little bit. So get that exposure and just keep on top of it. Nip it in the bud almost if hamstrings are your problem area. And if they're not, there's no reason why you'd be sprinting anyway, because there's so many other benefits to it. So how do we then structure a pre-season, our week? So you need 2 strength and power sessions at least per week during the pre-season phase. No matter if you're training with your team twice a week, 3 times a week, 2 is a good rule of thumb. As you maybe get closer to closer to the season, and training intensifies a bit more, we might be able to drop to 1. But the full body approach works best here because you get less local fatigue in a specific area of the body. For example, if you follow your typical bodybuilding split where you're doing chest and tries, back and bis, legs and shoulders. I don't know. It's been a while since I've done. It's been a decade since I've done a bodybuilding split, but it generally looks like that, right? You're going to wake up after one of those training days. The leg day in particular, you're going to feel feeling and walking like you shit yourself, and that's not going to be very football friendly because when you then have to go and do all the runs in football, you're setting yourself up for a very, very you're setting yourself up for injury, to be honest with you. Or your recovery is going to slow down massively, and then it's going to impact the following week of training. Even if you manage to get through that session, the session after that is going to be impacted massively. And we see that a lot with anyone who trains like a bodybuilder. The football always suffers. If looking like a bodybuilder and training like a bodybuilder is your priority, then go crack on. But if you're watching this, it's probably not. It's probably your priority. You probably want to look good, which you can still develop by doing a full body approach, providing you train the right exercises, the right reps, and you allow yourself enough recovery between sessions. There's no reason why you can't look like an athlete, but also perform like one as well. We then come to speed, 1 to 2 times per week. It needs to be speed specific, 10 meters, 20 meters, 30 meter sprints, flying starts, half kneeling starts, accelerations, forward starts. There's so many different ways you can train acceleration and speed. Anything up to around 20 to 30 meters is going to be more of an acceleration. So it's like your first few steps and being first to the ball. Think of it like that. That's what you're training to be a little bit more reactive. Anything beyond 30 meters, maybe 30, 40, 50 meters is going to be your top end speed, which most players don't get exposure to. That's the one that really, really suffers. So you want to make sure you're getting that exposure when you're doing your speed work. It's something we do inside Fit Fun. We call it our fast lane framework. We make sure we're getting these distances. We're hitting these distances every week, and we'll alternate between shorter distances, longer distances, to ensure we get that exposure so that you're getting faster, you're feeling explosive, getting more explosive, and also using it as an injury prevention tool or injury reduction tool. Because sometimes you can't always prevent injuries, but you can definitely reduce your chance of them. Around that, you then have team training, which is great for your technical, your tactical development, your conditioning and your fitness. You don't necessarily need to be doing more 5K runs. You don't need to be doing more conditioning runs. Team training is going to be ticking the majority of those boxes for you. And it's quite good because the conditioning work can be hard sometimes, especially if you need to really take yourself to a certain level of fitness. Having that environment in team training can really push you to that next level with your fitness. And once you've got that, along with your speed, along with your strength and power, and your recovery, which we'll speak about in a second, suddenly you're starting to become a better athlete overall. You're starting to actually improve your performance rather than just relying on team training alone. Now, balance is really, really important. I've spoken about the buckets. Which buckets need filling? You have to constantly ask yourself that question, almost on a daily basis and a weekly basis. It's something I do for every single player we work with. I do it for myself. You have to ask, what have I got exposure to coming up this week? Okay, I've got team training Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Well, where's my speed sessions? Am I getting any power work? Can I combine my speed and power before team training so I don't have to be living in the gym? Suddenly you do that little bit of speed and power before team training, you're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. And then you can use the days in between for rest and recovery. But if you neglect these components, you're going to leave gaps in your fitness, you're going to leave gaps in your performance, which can impact you, especially when you get further into the season, when the games come thick and fast. So you need to be really, really smart with how you balance things out, especially during these pre-season phases, off-season phases, because they're going to set the precedence for what comes in season. Recovery is so important when it comes to this phase. Now, I know I'm talking about a lot about strength, speed, power, training. All of these things we've spoken about is a stimulus for growth. The growth only happens when you recover. I'm going to say that again. Training is a stimulus for growth, but the growth will only happen when you recover. Ultimately, you can only get fitter, faster, stronger from the training that you recover from. If you're always training and you're not recovering properly, it's a downward spiral. It's a very, very dangerous place to be in. You end up overtraining, you end up burnt out, injured with niggles, tendons hurt, your joints hurt. Being there, believe me, I get it. So you need to be really, really smart. We look at sleep and nutrition as the two main recovery strategies, especially inside Fit 90. This is what we do with the players. Once you've got them two on lock, then we look at active recovery strategies. Looking at the little things like a foam roller or a massage gun, things that might help around the sleep and nutrition. But if your sleep and nutrition is a shit show, there's no good doing the active recovery work. You need to get those two things dialed in first. Now you've got an understanding of what you need to be focusing on. It's like a case of really looking at how are you going to track your progress? How are you going to know that you're getting fitter, faster and stronger? Something that is massive inside Fit for 90 right now is we're actually doing, a lot of the players are getting GPS vests for their sprint times. And it's getting quite competitive. It's quite fun actually, because including me, that I'm trying to beat them, they're trying to beat me, right? And we're looking at who's getting the quickest times in the speed work. We're then looking at things like a whoop. Some players have jumped on a whoop and a GPS, because then this is there for the recovery. This is looking at the sleep. This is looking at how much strain we put on the body. And we're able to utilize the metrics from whoop. We're able to utilize the metrics from a GPS vest, sync it up to the system that we used. And we've got a really holistic where the player is at any given point during the week or during a particular phase of the season, pre-season. The system we also use in terms of the training and strength aspect allows us to log the loads and the weights that we're lifting, so we can track that metric over weeks and months in the gym. Are we actually getting stronger? So it's important that you monitor all of these different aspects, because if you're not assessing, you're guessing, as the saying goes. It blows my mind the amount of players that just don't log what they're doing in the gym. It's all common sense. Like, how can you know if you're getting stronger if you don't know what you did 2 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago or 6 weeks ago? If you lifted 32 kilograms on 32 kilogram dumbbells on a split squat, 5 reps, 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, but today you did 30 kilograms for 3 reps, you're not implementing the principle of progressive overload, where you're slowly you're doing a little bit more each time you go into the gym. Are you increasing it by a rep? Are you increasing the weight a little bit? Because if you're not implementing progressive overload, there's no way you're going to make progress. And that comes down to tracking and logging what you're doing. Does it take a bit of time? Does it take a little longer? Yeah, perhaps. Is it worth it? Absolutely. The trade-off is almost, it's non-negotiable really if you're serious about improving your performance. Something we see a lot of players do, the biggest mistakes I see is a lot of players overdo the conditioning work at the expense of strength and power training. So you might go to training on a Tuesday, a shitload of conditioning work, and then try and do some more conditioning work on do a circuit in the gym on a Wednesday. It's like you're just training the same energy system. You'd be better off doing some heavy lifts, alternating between like a lower and upper body split. So maybe doing like a front squat, an overhead press as a superset. Like doing these full body workouts that we spoke about at the beginning of this. Getting that strength exposure, lifting heavy for anywhere between kind of 3 to 5 reps. Doing some jumps and throws at the beginning of that workout. You're going to get a lot more out of that than just doing more conditioning, because you're going to, again, leave gaps in your fitness, which will affect your performance. Don't focus too much on the team training. That's always going to be there. You're always going to get exposure to the football. You're always going to get exposure to the tactical stuff and the conditioning that comes from being at team training, which is great. But don't neglect, don't not do the extras just because of team training. Because ultimately, what you do away from the pitch, the strength work, the speed work, the power work, that is going to help you when you step across that white line. And if you don't do that, you're only going to be able to perform to a certain level before you don't really go any further. And that's often where players join the program, is they get to a point where they can't break that barriers because this is what they're doing. They're not doing those extras. And it's not because they want to. Sometimes they don't have the knowledge, which I totally get. And that's what Fit for 90 is here for, to be fair, is to help give the knowledge, the tools, the resources. It's why I'm creating things like this, to help you to understand what you need to be doing around training. The key thing also, the real big mistake I see players make, is they do too much during pre-season. Recovery and rest is really, really important, and knowing when to implement it, when to push hard and when not to, is also very important. For example, when you're training speed, you want to be doing that off the back of a recovery day, ideally, because you're going to be nice and fresh. You're much more likely to hit a higher speed, which essentially is what we're trying to do. We're trying to get quicker for one rep. It's not a conditioning session. Speed is not conditioning. Speed is you're trying to get faster for one specific rep. And to do that, you need to rest a lot during that speed session, but also make sure you're well rested leading up to that speed session. So an example week, what was an example week maybe look like? I'm actually going to build this out. Let's do it. Let's have a look if this is going to play ball. So Monday, what's going on there? Monday, right. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So just an example training week, pre-season, right? So let's say you're training team training Tuesday. Today you've got a pre-season game. All right. Just an example. How would you map out your strength work, your power work, and your speed work, and of course your recovery? Well, the beautiful thing is strength, speed, and power can often do together, or the speed you could do separately. The speed and power you might do separately, and the strength could be a separate session. Okay. Now, really depends on the intensity of these team training sessions or what you want to do on the day in between. A lot of players could probably get away with doing a full body session here, full body strength. Short, sharp, 30 to 45 minute lift, that'll make a big, big difference. We could potentially do a second lift here, especially if you're playing a game. You don't really want to be doing too much on Thursday, Friday from a strength standpoint. Like that. Friday, I would recommend some recovery, so you're fresh for Saturday's game. And Sunday, I would probably also go for recovery. So you're probably thinking, right, where do I put my speed work in then? Well, coming off the back of a recovery day here, depending on how many minutes you get on this Saturday, we could potentially do some speed work, potentially. And I'm going to highlight this. Right. So we could do it there. We could potentially do it here before team training. This wants to play ball. No, it doesn't. Okay, let's just do that. So just put it in there. Speed. Could potentially do it there. Some players might not be able to do a strength session in the middle of the week. So we might make this a recovery day and then actually do speed work prior to team training, which could work quite well as a bit of a primer, really, to Saturday's game. Let's get rid of that there. So you can see that there's options. Of course, this split here, you would do one strength session a week, which seems like, what's the point of doing like one strength session a week when in fact, actually, you can make some really good progress by doing one strength session a week, providing you get the right volume and the right intensity within that session. And sometimes you can split it a little bit. So, for example, there are some lads that might be able to do an upper-lower split. However, if they're training this type of schedule, it might be a bit more difficult. Some lads do, inside Fit for 90, we do tend to maybe look at a leg session here and then allowing your body fully recover. So it could look something like, just an example for you guys. I wouldn't always recommend this. It really depends on the athlete. Sometimes if you're a bit more intermediate or advanced, this is what we would go for. But for the majority of players watching this, the full body approach is going to work best. But we could do something like a recovery. We could do speed uppers. So it could look something like that. We could do game. You might play 60 minutes there in a pre-season game. Lower D, recovery. This could be speed or uppers, and there's obviously whichever one this isn't, it would swap. So that could be uppers and team training, then speed. It could be speed and team training, then uppers, and then you might do another speed exposure there. You might take that out and just focus on team training. You have some flexibility. So you could go for an upper-lower split, or you could go for a full body split. The only thing with this is you might, if you're a little bit of a beginner, you might take a little bit longer to recover from this lower session, and it might drip into your Tuesday, and you might be feeling the effects of it a little bit. So that's why we say the full body approach might work better for majority of players until you get to a certain level of fitness and conditioning, or you can start to maybe transition into more of a lower split. But it's something that we have a conversation with a lot of the players as they get to a certain point. We had that conversation. Do you want to go to an upper lower split? These are the benefits. This is potential, the downside of it. Or simply you could just continue with the full bodies if they make a real progress. That is how you would map out your preseason. Sorry, map out your training week around preseason. If you want help mapping out your perfect preseason, DM me preseason on Instagram at coach_Cayman, or just comment on this video wherever there's like a comment box around it. And when I get the notification, I will be in touch with you. Hope you guys found this useful. Have a good one.